It got so cold, I had to just pause a moment and warm up a little bit. The dogs were even shaking. Um, okay, so this is part two. And as you see, I just updated the thumbnail as well. You will own nothing. This is what we're going to focus on in this section. There's going to be two particular focuses that we have. Now, of course, we've already seen, let me just make sure that this is streaming on this other side here. Let's see, one more time. And yep, it's looking okay. So in the last video today, we talked about Candace Owens. We talked about what's going on, the bounty that's being used to not just silence her. They're not doing that. They're not pulling the plug. In fact, YouTube, as an example, is making millions on advertisements for her. So they're not cutting it off. Not because they want that money. That's a pittance to them. But they're not. And they're not shadow banning her, but they're allowing the crazy talk out there. And what we've seen is there's a decision on who can speak and when they can speak. If it plays into this bigger agenda, it's allowed. And if not, it's not allowed. And this little guy, sorry, he's really cold. He's got a jacket he normally wears. So here we go. Let's see if you can see. You want to see? There we go. Here's the little guy. Okay, for a moment there, he kind of looked like a skunk, but he's quite a handsome dude. Just a little shy. He doesn't know where that camera's at. Okay, there we go. Okay, so on the second segment, I want to move beyond what's going on with Candace Owens, although as long as I can remember, I'll kind of wrap it up with that at the end. But I want to focus on opportunity cost. When opportunities are given in one direction, they're taken from another direction. I gave the example of Haiti and all the money from USAID and all the nonprofits, NGOs, everything that went in after the, different events. And, it took away from the local businesses and forced them out, and it destroyed their economy. When you get an influx of all that free stuff, somebody in the United States was making money off of it. But the people that desperately needed it in Haiti lost their businesses. So who can benefit is really a big deal. And so I wanted to, open with that, and hopefully I'll come back to that. But right now I want to tell two stories. One is, which is related to the thumbnail, the 82-year-old woman who was kicked out of her home, and then also Department of Labor corruption. So let's go ahead and start with the first one here. And I want to show you something too that we made during COVID, and just want to kind of show this sign here. This will kind of be like a sponsored by ourselves. Let's see if that'll come up here. This is the brand that we're using in order to launch all the software and the program and the classes and web development and everything that's being created as a solution for in this environment. So every once in a while, I'll go ahead and show this as a commercial break. We've applied for a number of affiliate marketing, but until our channel gets bigger, we're just getting turned down. And it's actually surprising even smaller organizations that are choosing that. Okay. All right. So home theft. I started to describe a little bit about where this process happened for her. In 2006, a loan was taken out against her property. She found out in 2007 because she had an NOD, notice of default, for $43,000, meaning she wasn't paying on the loan and nobody else was. She went through a series of additional NODs that she was able to do modifications on and start paying for. But all the while in her mind, she kept thinking, this can't happen. This isn't possible. Her home is paid off. She didn't have a cash flow issue, and she didn't understand why this was being allowed. A comment went through my head, but I don't want to put that out there yet. So let me move on and see if I can come back to that. So then at one point I mentioned that an attorney told her to file bankruptcy, and through a bankruptcy protection that they could not take her home until they could figure out what was going on. Well, one attorney streamed through her life after another and didn't actually resolve the core problem until till a Sunday in March after she came home from church, two police officers, which as of last night, I read, so apparently I got it on Friday, a declaration from the San Jose Police Department that it wasn't their officers. Now, this lady is very well known in the community and has worked for many, many public entities for decades. She was a highly skilled professional, and they know her name. And so when she said that she saw San Jose police officers in her home removing her, that was a valid statement. She worked with those officers for decades, not those particular ones, but she knew the uniform. And I said, that's not what the San Jose Police Department gets involved with. If it's an eviction process, that would be the sheriff that needs to get involved. And she said, absolutely not. It was not the sheriff. It was the San Jose specifically police department. So we've been trying to get through San Jose records what the call was for them to come out there that day. And as of the document that I saw that came to me on Friday that I opened last night, they don't have a record of being out there that day. So this ties into the ongoing issue of the fraud, meaning somebody impersonated police officers in order to intimidate and threaten this woman and get her to step outside the home. There's a lot of fraud twists and turns in this case, and unfortunately, she's not the only one that this has ever happened to. So in fact, if we step back a little bit, when she started telling me her story, I didn't really have any basis for that other than I knew that Washington Mutual had committed fraud against me. But I moved away, moved my mortgage somewhere else, and the issue was over. So I didn't have a baseline for anything else she was telling me. But as I was talking to more and more people, I started hearing the same words come up over and over again. The words were modification. I hadn't heard of that before. And SPS, Select Processing Services, a company out of the Midwest that they're a massive company. In fact, they just sold this summer from one large entity to another large entity. Okay, hold on. He's getting out. Okay, there you go. In a minute. So I just started researching, and the reason I heard about it is one of my friends is an executive at Cisco, and as Cisco was trying to remove some of the executives to replace them with H-1B visa holder executives, and that's what we're going to talk about in the second half of this, is she had said she owned a very, very large home on a lot of land, and it was just beautiful. And she kept it open to everybody. Anybody that ever needed help, she used that home to help the community, individuals. Just a very, very kind woman. She informed me that she was losing her home because, or she had gone through the process of losing her home because she just couldn't keep up the payments. And that didn't make sense to me because she made about $500,000 a year. And I'm assuming there were probably bonuses and stock on top of that. So it just didn't make sense to me. And she said that SPS stopped taking her deposits. Well, then I found out that, in fact, it wasn't SPS, but it was a similar service. And she would make a payment and then they would not accept it. Or she'd make the first two payments, which is really what happens in most cases. And then the third one, they wouldn't reset. So she could never do a modification in order to hold off until they figured out what the fraud was. This grew rampant during COVID when everybody was locked down and there were no federal agencies doing investigations or any actual policing going on. A lot of individuals lost a lot of property rights. So as I mentioned, I came across this 82-year-old woman because she had been dragged into court for trespassing. And I explained the reason why she would be out in front of the house, and the process that she would do with the police officers. But on this one day when she called to get the little orange ticket and have them standing there, as she made sure there were locks put back on the gate and the front door so her stuff couldn't be stolen until all of this got handled, the police officer this time wouldn't take it. So he made her get out of her car. He put her down on the road. There's a lot of damage to her body, and arrested her, took her downtown, booked her, and then they did not release her until she bailed out. So the only pieces of information I had to go from were contacting the bail bondsman and verifying that bond was paid. It would only have been paid if she was arrested. And also she had a notice to appear, not a notice to appear in court. She had a card with a county case number on it. And with that, we were supposed to call and figure out when she was supposed to appear. So I showed up to court with her. There was no real hearing. The public defender that she had just met right then, that really looked at the case and didn't have much to say about it, went into where the DA was, not the DA, but one of the attorneys from the DA's office, in front of the judge. They all huddled in the corner in front of everybody. And she was I think one of the last ones to be heard, if not the last one, as I recall, because we left right after that. And I think that was done for the day. And but they made us wait the entire time. And they said, we really don't have anything here. And so they agreed to dismiss it. They came back and handed her some paperwork and said that the case was dismissed. She didn't need to do anything else. And she asked if she could get her bond money back, the bail money back. And they laughed at her because she had been told that if she posted that and showed up, she would get that money back. Clearly, she'd hired through a bondsman, and the bondsman was their money for their risk of her flight. So that was not factual what had been told to her, and so she was not getting her money back. But we were told she didn't have to come back. This was handled. They didn't have any paperwork to give us or any processing. We went to the court clerk anyways to see what we could get, and there was nothing. Then that's when the story really started to take off. So we then went to the senator's office and said, we need help. She didn't know what she was arrested for. She didn't get any information from the public defender or the DA. There wasn't any kind of a hearing. It's been dismissed, but she doesn't know what or why. And she was really treated pretty badly. And it just, none of it made sense to her because she's still trying to figure out a way to get her home back. And so as she went through this process, she just got treated worse and worse and worse. And we see this all the time. We see that once somebody is caught in their snare, they continue to focus on them and watch them and make life a living hell no matter what. And it just, at some point, you think it's got to stop. Unfortunately, the stop just doesn't make sense. So, so the senator's office duplicated what we had done. Right after we left court, we went to the actual DA's office. We now had the card in our hand of the public defender who said, you should look into this. There's something odd about it. And she didn't really want to give us her card. But I asked for it, and she did pull one card out of her wallet. We emailed her while we were standing there, and she never replied. Months later, or month and a half or so later, I found out that she was transferred to another department, but still within the county. So she would still have the same email that she wasn't applying to multiple times. And when we're standing there in front of her emailing her, there's no reason why we didn't get a response, which added to the confusion as to what was going on. the DA would refuse to tell her what she did wrong. We went to the victims unit and we went to their clerk's office, records office, and they would not meet with her. They kept saying, you've got to send an email. We not only wanted information regarding the arrest, we wanted information regarding the illegal seizure of her home. We wanted a case filed and an investigation. And the DA's office, as of today, has still refused to do so. And we're now approaching almost 2 years. So she's going to run out on additional rights if nothing moves forward by then. But they refuse. They will not meet with her. They won't take a case. And when I finally got a hold of somebody in the real estate division, it was a huge runaround. They pulled up what they considered the case file on her regarding the house and came up with information that was totally false. It was enough in alignment from what I saw when I went and pulled the title records, and I went to the county clerk and I pulled bank records. What he was reading to me was enough of a similarity to let me know that he was talking about that particular property, but he certainly wasn't talking about any of the documents that I was looking at. It made no sense to me. They already had decided they were not going to help this woman. He was telling me that because of her age, she's probably senile and she probably signed something she wasn't aware of. This lady is extremely sharp. She knows what reverse mortgages are. She knows different pitfalls. And in fact, she'd been getting calls for years to sell her home at different prices. And she always said no because she wanted her home. But also she knew that there were always scam and strings and she didn't want to get caught up in any of those. So at no point would she have accidentally said yes or accidentally signed something. And yet still nobody would help her. By the point that I came along, she had been dealing with this for decades. And yet she kept pursuing. And as I continue with this story and letting you know everything that I went through, you'll understand that she on her own never had a chance. So after 7 different times of going into the DA's office, asking for them to meet with us, asking just to meet with somebody, asking to make an appointment for a later date, I was finally granted an opportunity to sit down with somebody only after I invoked the California Open Records Act request, of which I had invoked that to them several times before, and they didn't care. This time I finally got somebody to sit down with me and write down our request. However, before I even left the office, I learned later, I already received an email from them saying the case is closed. They weren't going to pursue for reasons of privacy. What greater privacy than with her? Now, I went through this as well when I worked for the federal government. They were doing things to me that no human being should ever have to be dealt with. And yet they couldn't tell me what it was. Even when I pulled a Freedom of Information Act or FOIA on myself, the documents I got out were so redacted that I didn't really even know if they pertained to me or not, or what was even on the documents, all black. And they wanted tens of thousands of dollars for simple things just to make sure that I could never get access to even reports on myself. One of the allegations is that I was such a horrible person and abuser of the taxpayer funds that I didn't show up to work for, I think they said 11 months or whatever that turned out to be. So naturally, I asked for the login records. When I went to work, I had to constantly use a badge and a biometric and a password with my computer at my desk. So they knew the IP address, they knew the location, they knew my location. Anytime I went through any of the doorways or switched floors or came in the main building, they knew that I was in there. So I asked for just the computer login records proving where I was every day and my check-ins throughout the day. There was nothing such as coffee badging back then, and there was limited work from home. So I was proving again that I was in the office. And yet their allegation was that I didn't show up to work. So that would have been a very simple tool. I had gone myself to the floor where the IT staff sat, and I asked them what is the exact steps that I would name in order to get that information to protect myself. And they not only verbally told me so I could write it down, they showed me as they were doing it. And it took, the longest part of it was me keeping up with the writing. They had a printout of all my logins for back as far as I wanted to go. And I said, okay, how do I access that? Knowing that they couldn't hand it to me. And they said, well, you do have to ask for a FOIA, and this is what you would give them. So I went through those exact steps they did. However, because the government deemed that that is information they don't keep on the premise, they keep in another location, although I had just seen it produced. And they went through all of this privacy, and they could never provide it. But if they could, it was going to be $7,000 for something like the first year, and then another $10,000 for the years before that. And it was ridiculous. Now, they do have a right to charge fees if, in fact, they incur fees. There were no fees that they were going to incur other than the time of the IT professional who wasn't doing anything else, because under the Obama administration, they literally came into the federal building, built a glass box on the 4th floor around the IT people and have them work inside the glass box. You could walk around this big glass box and see the people inside like a cage. They had limited ability to do their jobs, just as our contracting folders on the 5th floor were removed and put in storage areas because they didn't want us to touch them during whatever weird process that they were going through. I never found the truth as to why those things were happening. However, my coworkers started to become deceased during that period. And a lot of odd things started to come to fruition, but we couldn't have the truth. So back to this lady, 82-year-old, we were trying to get an understanding of why she was arrested and why nobody would investigate her home theft. Because what we're looking at is elder abuse. We're looking at illegal seizure of property, both the home and the contents. We're looking at wrongful eviction, and we're looking at illegal foreclosure. I think those were the core terms. But somehow none of that could be looked into. And at that point, we were still undergoing the thought process that she'd said there were police officers, so we had to assume it was police officers. But now that the police have shown that they didn't have a call on that date, they're now either covering it up, which is possible because of the next issue here, or the company who seized the home impersonated them. And that will be the next step on the investigation that I'm looking at. But why would we think that the police would be covering it up? Because they're covering up her police records. We went down many times. I talked about the DA's office. Now, if we go back to the San Jose Police Department, we've gone in there many, many times to their records department and requested information on the request. We requested it outright, and then we also requested it under an Open Records Act request. In addition to the body cam footage, the car cam footage, who made the call that brought them out there, and any other communication around this. There was one officer that did not want to be involved. And then, of course, there was one officer that seemed to be acting outside of what protect and serve really meant. So we were trying to figure out what's going on. In the police department, every time we filed, I would have them stamp on a piece of paper the date and give me a copy of the paper. They can't find any of them. Even when I bring in my copy, they can't find any of the requests. As I email through their online portal, they don't have any of those requests. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we went to the state senator's office for them to do an Open Records Act request on the date of the hearing. And here we are so this now over 45 days ago. When you do a Public Records Act request in California, they have 10 days to respond. That doesn't mean that they have 10 days to provide you all the data that you requested, but they have 10 days to acknowledge the request and state what they can provide and what they can't provide. And if they can't provide it, the reason or jurisdiction or whatever it is on why they can't. And then they have an additional, what I believe is 14 days from that point to go ahead and provide the information. Now we're out over 45 days, and they will not even respond to the senator's office. As of last week, the senator had reached out once again, and San Jose PD responded back that they still don't have a request from them, even though the inquiry had the request attached again with a date and time stamp of the second request. I don't know why they didn't send the first one over, but that was the one, I guess, that she had handy. So we're just completely getting blocked. I had an event in San Francisco. So while I was there, I was chatting with one of the police officers on the street, and I was asking him about the drone surveillance that is now being used in San Francisco. And that is a fascinating conversation that we're going to talk about as we introduce our drone. I think ours is now a honey something. I know it's not one of the DJIs, but it's very similar. It could just be a logo change. But anyways, I asked him if he had any access. And so he looked up for me the court case information, and he saw that. And I saw what's really odd is we can't get an arrest record. The police department can't seem to find the file, and we don't know why she's arrested. So he proceeded to look up some information, and there's no arrest record. And he looked up her name and her birth date, and there's no arrest of her in the system. And he went through all the mugshots around that period of time and with, her and her birthday, and there isn't one. And I said, well, how could there not be a mugshot? Because once they're in there, he said that they don't delete them. So then where is the file? Why was she arrested? And why is there no information on the arrest? So several times a day, every week, I dedicate to getting out there with my feet and walking to figure out what is going on. And I rotate between First Street and Mission and I can't think of the other street going the other way right now. I just kind of walk the blocks. I go from the San Jose clerk's office to the public defender's office, up to the San Jose Police Investigator Auditing Center, and then around to the Sheriff's Department, back through to the DA's office. And then I just keep making that loop. And every time I'm treated with absolutely disrespect. I can't get any of the data, and they seem to have lost the information I requested the last time. So again, if you were 82 and you kept walking this pathway and kept getting treated like this over and over again, and you've already been removed from your home after fighting for decades, just agreeing to pay whatever to hope that somebody would come to their senses, at some point there's a mental breaking point. I don't know how she hasn't reached it yet. Just kudos to her strength and lifting her eyes to knowing that God is watching out and God has his own purpose, because it doesn't make sense to me. But this is the reality that I have faced practically my entire life. So if the DA won't provide any information, back to the public defender's office. I've gone in there a number of times, and the public defender keeps telling me that, no, there's nothing there. They see that. There's another one. Come on. You got to help, though. Here's the other little guy. Oh, I guess he's going to sleep here. I'll show him in a minute. So the last time, though, that I was in the public defender's office, they told me something and my ears perked. They said there's now additional charges against her, and the arraignment is coming up in a couple months. And I said, what do you mean the arraignment? What does that mean? I don't know that vernacular. And they said, well, it's the first time she's requested to appear in court. I said, no. She and I appeared in court on X date. So why? Here we go. Maybe you can see him here we go. This is the baby here. This is the baby. He was so awesome during COVID when I was absolutely in a coma. He slept on my head for at least 3 days until I woke up and I had to get up and use the bathroom. And he was relieved that he could finally go too. He's just such a good guy. Such a good guy, huh? Such a good friend. So they told me that the arraignment was coming up, and I said, no, we'd already gone and it was completely dismissed. And they explained to me that the DA has additional time to file additional charges, and they've exercised their right to do that. And so even though we went the first time and it was dismissed, there's now additional charges. Well, how is she supposed to know this? We've been asking for the information and nobody will provide it. I am very persistent and she's very persistent. Most people are just trying to survive in life and hear that, oh, it's dismissed, and they just move on, as rightly we should be able to do. So how is it that additional charges can be filed on a case when they know that we're investigating and we're on top of this? You would think that they'd at least want it to go quiet, but they don't want to do that. So we're gladly showing up for that one as well. Apparently, we're just seeking prayers that she doesn't end up back in jail. We don't want any more punishment for her. So there's not any help. There's apparently no case, but there's enough of the case to now add additional charges. And yet she doesn't have a right to know. The whole thing is just crazy making. So we've been contacting the FBI. There's no FBI in our area. The nearest one is up in San Francisco. And so I was finally given a hint that there was a Secret Service office in San Jose, and we could contact the Secret Service. They would go ahead and take the report and they would get it to the FBI on our behalf. I don't understand how that happens if it's a shared, I don't know. But I went ahead and called, and lo and behold, somebody answered the office, an absolutely very kind woman who, even more to my shock, passed the message to a Secret Service officer. The Secret Service officer then sent me an email and told me that it wasn't a criminal act. And again, we're not asking about the police issue or asking about the other issues I named related to her home. It wasn't criminal and he couldn't get involved. So he and I went back and forth several times until he finally called me. And I called him back, and he explained to me that he's been with the Secret Service for 27 years. He's the only officer in this office, and he just doesn't have the bandwidth to work on it. But based on his experience, this is not a criminal issue. I'd already sent him documents showing that it's not only criminal, but it falls under the FBI jurisdiction because there's multiple banks involved, and they're all in different states and out of the state that we're in. So it's multiple states involved. But for some reason, again, they refuse to investigate it. So I continue to call, and I have called many FBI offices. The only one that really I was able to talk to before this was probably sometime during the summer. And they were all the way in Florida. And it was a good conversation. Obviously, they stated a jurisdiction issue, even though they're federal, that didn't make sense. Nobody ever called me back and nobody followed up. Finally, I got in my car and I drove up north out of this jurisdiction into another jurisdiction. And that happened this week. There's an overlap here. I'll talk about this as well because I stopped at the Department of Labor in another district as well. But I also stopped at an FBI office. And the FBI office, are you getting down? Okay. The FBI, the woman happened to be coming back from break. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been in the hallway. The sign on the door says that they're open from, I can't remember, it was 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 daily. But it was now about 1 or so in the afternoon, maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So clearly we were in that window of time. But the door was locked and no way to even see through or to knock. So if she hadn't come back from break, I would not have had an opportunity to speak with her. I told her what I was after, and I got one rude response after another. Like, who are you? Show me your ID. Did you really go to San Francisco? If I pull the cameras in San Francisco, can you prove that you were actually there? Well, first of all, this isn't about me at all. But why would I stand there and lie to her about all the effort that I've put in with my own feet to try to get this woman help? Meanwhile, she hasn't contacted us again. So knowing that she said she would look at the file, and I've never gotten a response saying a reference number or a way to contact back, I immediately went back downstairs. I sat with my computer. I filled out yet another request. So by the time she got out of our meeting, if she did look it up, she could find our request. And then I have a printout showing that I filed that request. Well, I also called that office number back again, and they said that they could now make an appointment with me for San Francisco. I thought now because I had refiled and they finally found it. No, they meant now because COVID is over and they had to go back in the workplace, and now they have people in the office. This was part of the problem, that nobody was ever in the offices, so there was nobody to talk to. So I said, well, what about the file I just filed? No, they couldn't find it. I said, well, I have a screenshot right here. Now it doesn't exist. And they told me that there was another button after the screenshot that you had to push to file it. And I said, well, then, first of all, there wasn't one, because I kept looking and kept reviewing and figuring out, is there anything else I need to do? It finally came up with a thank you for filing. And do you want to print it? So that's what I did. That would be the indication that I reached the end of it. Why would there be another button on another page? And I told her that that's deceitful and that's disgusting, that the FBI is purposely making people think that they're filing cases, but not accepting them. This is just what the San Jose Police Department is doing. And I'll specifically talk about that case filing in a moment. So she told me I had to call another number, and she transferred me over to them. They informed me that, well, they didn't inform me anything. Actually, it went to hostile situation support or something, like it was a live scenario, and then it hung up. And I called back several times. They kept transferring me. Finally, they transferred me to an office somewhere in the Midwest. He went ahead and took my intake. So this is the first time in months that I'd been able to talk to somebody to actually give the details, but he couldn't give me a case number or a reference. I asked for his badge number, so at least I had a verification data point, but he was shocked that I even asked for that. And I asked him, this isn't right. This isn't normal. Why isn't there a reference point? And he said, this is normal. This is how we do it. So I took that information and I called the other number back again. And this time they saw his report in there and they put us on the calendar. So she and I will be going to see the FBI in San Francisco. We are discussing both cases, both the fraud of the arrest that she had and the cover up, and also the elder abuse, along with the illegal seizure of property, the illegal eviction, the wrongful foreclosure, all of those as well. There was another point with the news. I also went to many of the news facilities, and as I walked up, there were no cars in the parking lot. In fact, many of the news facilities that are local here in an area with more than 3 million people within the immediate valley, they're completely gone. But those that are still there have very few people in the parking lot, and if they do, they have a gate, and those people are parked behind the gate, and the front windows are all completely blacked out. There's no way to even open the door. There's no receptionist inside, but they just have a speaker system. So as you approach, somebody comes over the speaker stating that there's security and you have to remove yourself from the property immediately. Again, you used to be able to look to the news for reports or stories or get the information out, but they don't want. They're going to make up their own stories and read their own scripts. So we continue to push hard for this woman to figure out what actually happened. Now I'm going to tell you what I've pieced together. I started to tell you about the SPS piece. So at some point, and I don't know when, they got involved. It looks like multiple other loans were also open on this property. Now let's see, if you were a speculative investor and you wanted to take a home from somebody or buy a home, you would look for one that had an immense amount of equity. If it's paid off, that's even better. And a multi-million property would have a wide spread. You could buy it super cheap, have a lot of cushion to completely redo it if you wanted to, and then flip it. And it's all cash flow. Now, for most of us, when we go to an auction to try and buy a house, normally there's not that much of a discount. And then we know that there's huge headaches because we don't know who it was seized from, why it was seized, what the condition is going to be. There's a lot of questions. But those who continues to commit fraud are often handed these properties. So, although she thought that she had finally gotten ahead of this and moved forward with the agreeing to the mods that they kept denying, and then the foreclosure, bankruptcy rather, in order to maintain that, she thought this was ready, done. And then COVID came. Oh, sorry. So when COVID rolled around, everybody was in hiding except for the criminals. Remember that time where we had to put masks over our face and go into the banks? Burglars loved this. It was their pass to do anything they wanted. And so during this period of time, so much happened in the darkness. And the Democrats knew it. The government knew it. You and I knew it. So at some point, a company called SPS became involved. They're a mortgage payment processing center. What they do is people set up auto pay or direct pay, whatever that's called, and it goes in to satisfy the loan terms. So she went ahead and enrolled in that too and started paying them money. But she showed me the bank records from where the money was being pulled. And multiple times a month, there would be different amounts, all exceeding the amount she had agreed to. And they just kept helping themselves anytime they wanted. And yet on the flip side, they weren't showing that the payments were being paid. Out of that money, though, she was also paying for her property tax. And so I went to the county clerk and I looked at property tax records, and never once was she ever late. She's very diligent with her money, and she had stayed up on that all these years. So why would there be such a problem paying the mortgage? Because it was a moving target and it wasn't her mortgage. Her home was free and clear. So SPS kept playing this game with mods and went underground during COVID. I'd contacted an attorney based in New Jersey who explained to me the nationwide scam and why they were getting away with it. Most settlements end up being off the book so they don't have to go through the courts. But there was enough data that he was pulled together in order to represent thousands of clients himself. She got caught up in this. She was older. They were hoping that she would pass. There was an immense amount of equity in a home that had no initial mortgage. It was just right for the pickings. They didn't see that she's a fighter. So through the process, at some point, SPS decided that they were going to turn over the paperwork to a company in Arizona, National, I think it was NDSC. I have to look that up. NDSC then, according to our legal research at ChatGPT, informed us that they weren't authorized to handle a foreclosure because of the timing involved and the paperwork that was filed. There's strict laws, I guess, apparently. I don't know if they're just federal, but definitely in California that they needed to follow, and they did not. And the burden of proof is on them to prove that, one, they had right to the title and the deed, I think it is, and also that they gave proper notice. They have to follow eviction protocol. They have to follow foreclosure protocol. They did not. In fact, the notices that they sent to tell her that the home was in foreclosure and it was going to auction, we saw through county records, had their own address on it. So they mailed it to themselves. She was never intended to find out that this was happening. Another point of the fraud. So by time she had these officers, who now we believe were impersonating officers, knock on her door, enter her home, harass her, physically remove her from her home, She was in complete shock. Just absolutely could not believe or understand how this could happen. And she's never been allowed back in her home again. And this was March of 2024. She continued to reach out just as I have, but she's reached out for years. She, in fact, hired a couple of attorneys, and they gladly took money from her. And even one of them filed a case with the county in order to move this forward and get her home back. However, there was a response that they were required to do, and they did not respond. And so the case ended up being dismissed. And in that case, based on all accounts, she completely lost the rights to her home. So we went looking for attorneys, and it's very difficult to find an attorney. Everybody says you have to go get an attorney. In fact, when I was at the San Jose Police Department asking for documents, they said they wouldn't give it to us, even if they had it, because of privacy reasons, which is ridiculous. When you heard that word, you know that it has nothing to do about anything except for them not disclosing legal documents. So while they're hiding information, she's being pushed around from place to place and being told she has to hire an attorney and subpoena them for the information. And to that, I responded with, what money are we going to do that? Even when we went to the NGOs, there are senior advocacy legal associations or SALA. There's a whole bunch of them. Nobody will help. Oh, sure, they're very nice on the phone and they'll talk to you and they'll drag you around, down for a few months. But then they'll say, yes, we see that you do need an attorney. Well, you're an attorney. Yeah, well, we don't have the resources right now. Well, what are you doing? All our grants are going to help migrants because they're getting forced out of their homes. So this is where the money's going. This is the same theme I had on the Department of Labor side. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But all the grant money moved from just helping anybody that needs it fair to a specific niche of the population. So at this point, where does it stand? We filed a number of requests with the civil rights, with the FBI finally having a meeting coming up, with the San Jose Police Department for the records. We also went into the records office in order to meet with an officer to file a crime report, because the FBI wanted proof that we had gone to the local office, and she'd gone in there many times and they wouldn't do anything. So I said, okay, let's do it together. They refused. They said they no longer provide the service of taking police reports. That's what they do. So they said, you have to step outside and call 911 and get an officer to meet you. I said, it's pouring down rain outside and we're here right now and you're an officer. They refused. 2 weeks later, in that same office, but at an adjacent window, the gentleman told me the same thing. He said, you would normally step over here and file a report, but they're just not going to do it anymore. They're going to make you step outside and call an officer, which is ridiculous. So even in their own office, the peers are noticing the scam that they're doing. So anyway, she and I called 911, waited for an officer, and thank goodness he came quickly. She went over everything he was only there maybe 20 minutes, but went over the synopsis of what had happened, wasn't talking about the arrest, although he came in very huffy puffy about the arrest and how she was the perpetrator, but wouldn't. So there was something in the system, but he wouldn't tell her anything about it. So we kept it having to deal with the home theft and everything around that. What we told him is all we need him to do is to create a police report so we can get a printout and take it to the FBI. At this point, we didn't have the FBI meeting, but we knew that that was the next direction we had to gather that. So he said he was going to go back and get it approved by, I think he said superior was the term. And then we could get a copy after that. So 3 weeks later, just a little under 3 weeks later, we go back down to get a copy of the report. They don't have it. They don't have any record of it. So we start pushing for that and pushing for that. Finally, they find it. It's not like it's laying around in random pieces of note cards everywhere. This stuff is in the computer. They just won't be honest about it. So finally, we because we had the reference that he gave us and the typical orange card of the visit. So we had the officer's name and the date and the reference number, of which, again, the FBI couldn't give us any of that. So finally, I got somebody in there to tell me something that seemed odd, but I knew, wait a minute, he's trying to help. I've seen this before. And he'd asked me 3 times for my email address. And I said, oh, it's right here. He said, just write it one more time here. And then he asked me again. He said, put it right here. And so there was something different there. When I got home, I had an email from him showing me how to get that record. I can't get the other records yet, but at least we were able to get the record of her making the report with the police for the elder abuse, the wrongful eviction, the illegal seizure of property, both home and contents. So now we have that document. It is not an official report. It's just a mention that they met with her, but it says on the paper, it was determined that it was not a criminal issue, and therefore an official investigation will not occur. So again, she's gone down there many times, and the San Jose Police Department will not get involved. The DA's office that focuses on real estate fraud will not get involved. The FBI that focuses on a number of frauds, including wire theft, mail fraud, bank fraud, home theft, movement between, there's a number of lists. I think there were 9 core categories, and she checked 7 of them without even question, and probably the other 2 as well under IC3 rulings. But nobody will help her. And so now we're just trying to ramp up and figure out the next steps. I'm honestly not sure what that's going to be. When I was at the city clerk's office and I asked them for help in looking through the files, this is the kicker. In order for this agency to perpetuate the crime of selling it at auction and getting it transferred out of her name when she hasn't approved it, they filed with the county clerk's office an affidavit of death. They told the clerk by filing a fraudulent notice that she had died. Now she's afraid for her life. And rightfully so. She's been fighting for this property for so long. They finally illegally removed her from the property and nobody will help her. And she said, because of the lack of family, if in fact they do disappear her, nobody would know the wiser and the story would be over. So with that fact that they filed an affidavit of death and paid $0 in fees in order to then transfer the title into somebody else's name, that should raise questions. But to who? Nobody wants to listen to her. She's just an old woman. Nobody wants to listen to me because I don't have an attorney. Nobody wants to listen to her attorney because it's an endless circle. They don't do their damn jobs. Nobody does. I don't know why anybody within the ecosystem of being paid by taxpayer funds in Santa Clara County ever gets a penny. I even contacted one of my dear friends that I have known and gone on vacations with and celebrated birthdays for decades with. And I said, in a nutshell, this is what we have. And we just need to figure out how to get a copy of the actual arrest report. Who do I contact? These are the directions we've already exhausted, including contacting the senator's office and filing through internal IPA, which is, I think, it's something to do with Public Records Act. And her response back was, I don't know. Seriously? This has been her job for decades in that department, out on the streets with customer service, trying to solve problems. And she wouldn't even lift a finger to figure out how we could find it or why it's being blocked. And if she did, then her career is worth more than the lies and the theft and deceit of that department, which has been going on for decades. But at some point, it's just disgusting when everybody's looking the other way. So this woman has lived in her car for almost 2 years now. I guess we're probably about 19 months. And 19, even 20 months now. And no help at all. I've only heard her cry once. She's a very strong and beautiful woman, really well educated, has had very high level jobs, has lived a wonderful life. But with all of this, she just doesn't understand how this can happen. And yet she continues every day to step 1 foot forward, 1 foot forward. And I don't know how she does it. I've had several breaking points while walking from office to office and just left and sat in my car and cried. What is wrong with our system? Everybody tells you the SMS, and you know that if you're in sales, when you're trying to pitch something and they say, hey, just send me something. And you say, okay, and you send it and you think, oh, good, I'm getting closer to a sale. No, they're blowing you off. They just don't want to say thank you, or they don't want to argue with you. That's all it is. And this is what our public entities are doing. Oh, just send me an email. Just go to our contact form. Just mail me a letter. That one just fries me. If you can't respond to an email, how am I going to think you're ever going to get a letter and respond to that? But it's just absolutely disgusting. The apathy for one, but the theft of a paycheck for two. And you've heard me talk about during COVID, the percentage of people in California that actually had paying jobs versus all the individuals that were either on the dole or getting paid by taxpayers. There was one, and I can't remember the ratio now, that actually had a legitimate job where they were earning a paycheck because of work that they were performing in exchange for monetary benefit that didn't mean tax payment, where they just extract whatever they want out of your pockets. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. So we'll continue to fight this one, continue to meet with the DA, continue to meet with the FBI, and we're looking for a civil rights attorney as well. We have now filed a civil rights case for her with the Department of Justice in relationship to the behavior of the police. We don't know the pathway right now in order to get her home back. So the second part of this I mentioned, again, the topic of today is private eyes are watching you. She'd been watched for decades. Her home has been monitored. And whether or not it was direct, which we know it was, we also know that because it's been posted openly on sites like Zillow and Trulia, it shows whether when the last time the property was sold and what the estimated amount was, what the initial buy price, and somebody could easily figure out that unless there was a mortgage off market that wasn't posted publicly, there's probably a lot of equity there, prime for theft. And in counties that don't lock down the title, people can steal. And somehow nobody's accountable for that. So let me back up and share with you. I think those are the key issues on that. And if you've seen this and you've got any comments, please feedback on that. Let me just see if I can put this note right here. Just going to put a timestamp there in case I don't know if it'll show that or not. Maybe. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the Department of Labor. During COVID, I could no longer work at the location I was working because of the extreme restrictions. And so I ended up hustling and applying online because tax season it was about October. And I know that that's the time of the year where somebody would apply to help with a tax company. I'd worked for H&R Block years ago, and I decided I would just rejoin them for tax season. And then by the time tax season was over, the world would open up again and I could go back to a regular job. I pulled up H&R Block and I went ahead and submitted my application. And within, I don't know, minutes, it was very fast, I got an information, is it an email or a ping? I think it was an email from Intuit's tax department. And I knew in that moment that somehow either they had spoofed the H&R Block website or they had grabbed the data flow behind it that I had submitted. They had grabbed it. So I went to H&R Block and they had no record of me submitting an application. So I knew that Intuit had already committed a crime. But I thought between H&R Block and Intuit would be a much better opportunity for me because they have multiple departments. They're international. I could really stay more on a tech pathway than strictly moving into the tax world. So I decided to move along the pathway with their recruiter, but it always stayed in the back of my mind that I needed to be cautious with fraud with this company, that their integrity levels were much below the way I run my life. So I was very cautious with that in every move. I was then made an offer, and then right around the corner from that offer, and I can't remember the timeline, it was fairly quickly, the offer was not rescinded, but frozen. I don't remember the word that they used, pending a series of things that I had to do. I just applied to answer the phones for them during tax season. I did not want to do taxes for this company that obviously had integrity issues. So that's all I wanted to do. And so I told the recruiter that, no, you're putting me into a category that I do not want to do. And they kept saying, no, it's required because you're in California. And I said, no, here is the law. And they kept lying to me. And I know that lying is strong, but at some point when you're given the information and a resource to double check the information and you continue to stand on a story that's not true, it moves from an unclarity and gaslighting to an outright lie. And that's where we discovered the difference between disinformation, misinformation, right? Is purposeful. So anyways, I needed a job. And now we're moving beyond that period of October. I think we are now somewhere mid-November, maybe into November. And it was getting too late to go back to H&R Block. So I jumped through the hoops. I had an entire series of California tax classes I had to take, not only log the time, but pass all of their exams. And I think there were 5 exams, if I recall. I can't remember exactly now. So I had to pay the fees to do that. And I remember staying up for days straight in order to get all this done because they only gave me it was a very short period of time to either do it or they were going to rescind the offer. And so I went ahead and jumped through the hoops. I passed all the exams. I then had to go get fingerprints, but everything was still closed during COVID. So the sheriff's office was doing it 1 day a week, but you had to pay expedient fees and service fees. And there were a whole bunch of COVID healthcare fees, and it was really expensive. So in total, for this job offer that I'd already received, I now had to pay, it's fuzzy, I don't have that in front of me, but I had in the number $720 out of pocket. And so I took all of these receipts and I gave them back to HR, because if it's for a W-2 job and it's a requirement for the job after the point of hiring, then typically companies want to take care of it. I don't think it's the law that they have to, but it's a gray area now in what I read. But they typically want to. If you've shown that determination and you've met the standards and they're really hiring, they were actually mass hiring 10,000 people, that would be easy to do. They refused to reimburse me for any of it. And so when I got my manager, on the first day that I met my manager, I said, by the way, here's the receipts. Here's the job offer that I received that was not pending anything. And then here's the letter after that. And then here are the trainings and background checks and everything that I had to do. How do I submit this for reimbursement? And they refused to reimburse it at that level as well. So then I found out that I was now put into a different role where I was actually doing taxes, which I had done for years, and signing off on them. The problem is a number of individuals would not, my peers would not want to sign off on taxes because there's a lot of fraud. If you go into a tax person and get help, they get to look at you, ask you questions, and get a feeling for whether or not you're being honest. Most people don't want to lie to an honest tax preparer. So these people will call in to companies like TurboTax and lie. Yes, I have 15 kids and I have, I don't know, all these different credit deserves, and then they don't have any evidence. And if you ask them, they'll hem and haw or make something up. And if you push them, that's okay. They'll just end the call and then call back into somebody else and keep calling back until they get somebody that'll just do it for them because they just don't know. And a company like TurboTax or Intuit hires so many people during tax season and turns through it that at some point they're willing to get the lotto and they get all these funds back to them. In my case, cases were being, tax returns were being signed with my name via an electronic signature that I never authorized on cases that I never saw. When I went in the back of the desktop, I would see these cases come up and I never talked to them. And yet somebody else didn't want to sign it, so they would put my name on it. So I started asking through the process and found out that I had been put into an elite unit of harder taxes, which that's not what this was, and given the privilege because of my background in order to sign them. And I said, again, no, I accepted the job of answering phone calls, not allowing a company to use my signature, which became even a bigger deal as we moved down the road for another individual whose name was attached to tax fraud, and he didn't know it. So we went through that process. I held on as much as I could. By the end of the tax season, my ratings were so high, and I was offered a full-time position, not just a seasonal anymore, but now with the company year-round. So I was moved to another department. I was given, for the second time, a phenomenal boss. This time she was incredibly awesome person. And as she, I think we had her for a boss for probably about a week. And then she came on one day with another person in Zoom. And she wanted to introduce us to our new manager. And we were all shocked. Like, what happened here? And she told us that she was leaving this division because of an ethics issue. And it was very clear it wasn't her ethics issue. There were things happening on this side, specifically the overreach and monitoring of the employees that she saw was a privacy violation. And she just didn't want to have that be her career. So she went back to the other side, back to the TurboTax side, and continued to be a manager on that side. We all wanted to go with her because she was just very encouraging, really educated us a lot. It was we had a great group of 30 people and we got along very well together. We were told by Intuit that if we went, we'd have to resign, reapply, and then if we were chosen, we still wouldn't be put back on her team. Why would we quit during COVID? There was no guarantee to get any kind of a year-round job, and it was fortunate that we got in that one. Because up until then, every bonus or training they had excluded us from. No medical insurance, they found a way around all of it. We'd finally gotten a baseline, which I later found out our baseline was much lower than other employees. I'll check on this for just a second here. So the new manager was extremely racist. She was foreign born and made that well known, not only in her introduction, but the way that she was going to handle our team and who she was going to prioritize from team removal. By December, this was July, by December of that year, 22 out of 30 of our teammates had been forced to leave under duress. Many of them had been offered severance packages or bonus plans if they left. They never got them. Once they were pushed off the platform, they were on their own. Too bad. But we started to document a pattern. I mean, 22 out of 30, we kind of had that pattern early on. Unfortunately, a lot of people disappeared and we didn't know why. But about this time, we were all talking and wondering why there's only 8 of us left. And then 7. And with number 7, we had already outlined an entire playbook. And in fact, we documented that playbook step by step by step was used against this individual to emotionally manipulate her, to go into her computer and block her access, to change payroll records. The playbook was long and extensive. These are just some of the points that were used. Oh, scared me. Come here. Okay. I didn't know you were here. Come here. Here. Okay. And so by time the playbook came to me, I was prepared. I already had it outlined. And so as soon as the indication was that the wind was turning, I went to HR and I said, I want this to be private. And if it's not going to be private, at least meaning that it's not going back to my manager, we can have one level of conversation, still knowing that it was not going to be private. But if it was going to be shared with her, then we would have another level of conversation. He's just got sunbathe here. What happened here? Okay. So the HR person told me that yes, 100% of the conversation with her would always be kept in confidentiality. We could talk about anything. Knew that was a lie. But I talked a little bit more about what was going on with my specific manager, what the playbook was, what the pattern was. She knew it because I had a list of other individuals who had specifically reached out and been assigned to her and just stated, I don't want to file a complaint. All I want to do is a lateral move. Just pick any other manager. Let me move to that team. I don't even care if it's in this department. I learn very fast. Just give me a chance to move in another direction. And they refused. And in order to make sure that that was refused and that couldn't happen, my manager put me on a performance improvement plan. Well, I actually was happy with that. Not happy, but as far as options, because now we had a way to communicate. There was a document that I received that said that I need to improve in specific areas. Good. Let's sit down and review these so that I can understand in your mind, manager, what you want to see from me, and I can meet those standards. The problem is, as I opened up the document and I went through line by line each one of the issues, I noticed they weren't validated by the numbers that we actually had access to. In technology, you have access to analytics. You can pull up specific numbers and cross-reference them. In addition to that, I was making so much in bonuses from other managers who were rewarding me because I was top of the entire department, not just my team, my entire department. And so I was getting cash bonuses. But my manager wouldn't give me any bonuses. And I noticed when she would put out the numbers for our team, often my number was in a different font than everybody else's as she started manipulating and covering it up. So I went to HR and I said, I'd like to make an appointment to show you how the analytics are pulled, and you can pull for yourself to see that these numbers that are used in this performance improvement plan are not consistent with reality. This is where I came up with tech reality. She informed me that she's not a tech person. she wouldn't understand it anyways. And I said, well, I'll do it for you. We can Zoom and just show you. And she didn't want to. She said, that's not really what a performance plan is. A performance plan is a way to offboard you. It's not a way to have you improve. It's a way to document so that we can remove you at some point. And I said, so again, I just want to move to any other manager. And she said, well, you can't now. As long as you're on a PIP, you're connected to this manager now for the rest of your career now. Anytime you do get out from under her, they'll always have to go back to her for input before you move on to another stepping stone or manager. So they purposely did this and allowed it within their culture. I was shocked. But as a single mom, still during COVID, I was going to hang on for dear life. And that manager became more and more abusive as she was lock me out of meetings. Well, I don't want to go too much down that, but it's pretty crazy all the things that happen. So after about a year and a half of dealing with this, I ended up getting COVID, a very, very serious case. And when I came back, my manager was extremely angry at me. She said she thought she'd gotten rid of me. She didn't want to have to deal with me, and she kept telling me to quit. So when I would work, she would go into my payroll and change the payroll at the end of the week to show that I wasn't there all week and I was out on sick leave, even though I had worked all week and logged into payroll every day for that time period. So the job became more and more stressful. There were periods of time where she would lock me out of the computer, and I would go to the tech center on campus because campus is just down the street. And they would tell me that in real time, they could see that they would unlock it and it would be locked back up again. So they couldn't get around it until one day they told me that upper management had told them that they were not allowed to help me with my computer. And I was completely locked out again. So meanwhile, while I was on campus, I was walking around and looking for help and noticing that now people were coming back on by the time I had this last round of tech. But when I started, very few people looked like me, and it was hard to find anybody to have a conversation with. They just didn't speak English. So I became friends with those that I could and spent my time as much as I could. When I finally got my badge and access to go into the HR building, I walked over there. I used my badge, which was attached to my collar, to get in the door. It beeped and it unlocked, and I walked into receptionist right away and showed her my badge and introduced myself and said I wanted to make an appointment with HR. And immediately somebody came out that was the head of security, not HR, and removed me from campus. It's absolutely bizarre. And I said, am I barred from campus? He says, no. In fact, you can come back later today or tomorrow. You just can't go in that building. Well, I later found out that that's the executive building. And as long as I didn't mention HR, I ended up spending a lot of time in that building, sitting and having snacks and listening to the people preparing for board meetings. I really educated myself a lot. But that whole scenario was extremely odd. Well, as I progressed and I settled into campus time, because my determination, if they were going to lock me out of the computer, I was going to badge into the office every day so that there was no excuse that I'm not trying or I'm not. So every day I would badge in, I would send an email to my manager and say, I'm here and I'm ready for work. And then I would just wait. And then I would do it the next day and the next day. At one point, it was 36 days of being locked out. It was a hard time. So meanwhile, I kept attending different groups. I went to the global engineering group. They had GED, which is global engineering days, where you could network with other employees on campus with engineering backgrounds. And I ended up helping by volunteering on a lot of the different teams. I learned a lot in that process. I also learned a lot of the individuals that had H-1B visas were brought over during COVID And they were very scared. They were worried because they had come over here and they really wanted to be here. But the job that they had applied for was not what they were asked to do. And they weren't able to do it. And because of that, they were afraid that they were at some point going to get removed. Now, on the flip side, going to these GED days, I also met a lot of managers who said that they put out job recs, got them a, and all of a sudden the company would send somebody that had applied, apparently had already been flown to the United States and was now their solution, but they couldn't do the job. So under H-1B visa programs, you have to prove that you've exhausted all options locally and needed some specialized talent from abroad in order to fill that role. So I started going into HR and saying, I'm applying for quite a few jobs and I'm not hearing back. And they didn't seem to see that I'd applied for any jobs. So I said, I'll apply for one right now in front of you. And I let HR watch me as I applied for a job. Even standing in front of them, they never got my application. Applications were being blocked from locals as a reason for them to pull H-1B visas in from another country. But there's an opportunity cost. Slowly in my neighborhood, people like me were losing their homes, having to sell, having to flee California. But it wasn't people like me that were buying the homes. Individuals that had been here less than 18 months were buying homes. How do you buy a home with no job history in this country and no credit history? You and I can't do that. And yet somehow they were making huge down payments and paying over the price, asking price for homes. In another way of gentrification. When you don't have a job and you don't have the income level on the same level of somebody else, you get pushed out of the neighborhood. Now, any of these employees that I worked with on my teams that I'd reach out to, they made 7.5 times to 12 times more than me. So this was not cost saving for the company. Telling me they're probably getting government money for this. Now, when you file with government records, there's a lapse period before you can see what the filings are. In the last year, I was able to finally see the huge numbers of H-1B visas that Intuit brought into this country during COVID. While they were telling us that they weren't hiring and there weren't enough jobs, they were massively importing individuals. That's why people didn't look like me. Well, we've always been told that work culture is very, very important. If you're hiring some, you got to be a part of the culture. But what does culture mean? In my mind, culture means the ability to work together as a team towards a common goal to support the governance of the company or entity that you work for. Culture doesn't mean in the workplace what your skin color is or your economic background or your country. It means whether or not you want to do the job, you have an alignment with the goals of the job, you have the intelligence to do the job, you have the education experience and the ability to grab the new skills. That's what culture has always meant to me. Yet that Christmas, as I was sitting there with IT trying to figure out a way to get back into my laptop, I was so excited when the beautiful Christmas trees went up. I love trees, especially trees indoors. It's awkward, but there's some beauty on that. They put up these big trees and some white lights. They're just beautiful. It really added to the rooms. They're huge. And the very next day, I asked security, where did the Christmas trees go? And security responded, they were offensive, so they had to be removed. They weren't offensive to her. She liked looking at them. But it really showed that there was a culture shift. And the culture shift was not about improving teams. It was something else. So as I started looking for attorneys, I realized that because they had put me in such a low pay category, again, this is another opportunity cost. I talked about homes, but because they put me in such a low pay category and they were giving a much higher pay category and benefits package to the others, I couldn't get an attorney to help me. There were several that really spent a lot of time with me and were developing the case, but then I'd call and say that they just accepted another case. It was bigger and it was just a business decision. They couldn't continue. And it just didn't make sense to me. So I started going to the NGO groups, and I went to several, and I would show up over and over again, and I'd see lines of people that didn't speak English, and they would get helped right away. And in fact, they seemed to walk away satisfied with their help. At best, if I got to the window, I was told to SMS, to send something. Well, I'm there right now. They would not help me. So months after months after months, I kept going back until finally I decided to go to the board of directors of these organizations. And I asked, what is going on? And they informed me that although previously they had helped with labor laws, they had taken on massive grants that helped migrants. And so all the attorneys that they had that could do migrant work were moved to that side, whether it was labor or housing or immigration, it didn't matter. That's what they were doing. And they cut off all of their services in order to route in the direction that the grants were coming in. Another opportunity cost. So no lawyers, no legal help. There was nothing. So this brings down to the Department of Labor corruption. So I went to the Department of Labor and I would see the same thing. I'd see lines out the door of people that didn't speak English. And I would just be chatty and talk to different people in line and find out that one after another, they were here for just a final signature or a finalization. Their cases had been heard and they were handled quickly. Yet they couldn't hear mine. My case was filed in October of 2022. We're now rounding the middle of January of 2026, and they can't get to my case. Yet all these individuals, time and time again, were getting their cases resolved. So finally, in I think it was April of 2025, so a little less than a year ago, I got a call that said that I was getting my, and I don't know the word, they have all these terminologies that they have. So I was going to have some kind of a meeting with the person that they assigned me to. So I went into the office to ask, well, what should I have prepared? Should I have my documents prepared? Do I need an attorney with me? What do I need to be ready for that meeting? And they said, no, you don't have to have an attorney, and you really don't have to have any documentation. They're just going to talk to you about the Department of Labor and what they can do for you. This will kind of be an intro. Okay. So I get on the call, and there's another voice on the call, and I ask who that is, and that's opposing counsel. And so I don't even know what falls under the scope. I assumed that they probably owed me around $5,000 to $7,000, and that's what I was going off on. But I didn't know. And until the Department of Labor would sit down with me and go over my case, I had no way of knowing. So I told them that I was not comfortable proceeding because they didn't give me the information in advance when I asked for it, and I couldn't properly represent myself to an attorney. And if I asked stupid questions or ideas that were out of scope, the attorney would know that I wasn't educated and they'd take advantage of me. In addition to that, the mediator should have known better and prepared both sides for the proper meeting to start a fair negotiation, and that hadn't happened. So I was told that if I disconnected the phone, that I would not get another one of these meetings, period. And I said, okay, that's fine, but we can't continue now. So I knew that I was going to go to the executives or directors and figure out another path, because this person did not know how to manage their caseload, and this was inexcusable. So months later, out of the blue, after arguing to get somebody to talk to me, her manager had her reach out to me, and she went through my case with me item by item over the phone. The valuation she came up with that case without the other wage claim and without the retaliation was over $225,000. Now, I was very glad that I was stubborn and wanted to have better quality questions. Otherwise, I would have instantly lost over $220,000 just because I hadn't asked the right questions. And you and I both know that that's not the dollar amount that companies come back with. However, if you enter into a negotiation, you better understand what the rules are. I had no clue. And the rules seem to be changing. So in October, I was sent an email that I had a hearing, another meeting. I don't know the terms again. They keep changing them. I had another call on November 7th. So I was very excited. Finally, I was going to get an opportunity. I was now prepared. I had a better understanding of what they covered and what they didn't, or the scope of Department of Labor. And I was ready. I spent 3 days pretty much without sleep, going through all of my notes, going through legal records, educating myself based on what they had told me, and was very prepared. 3 days before the hearing, I went into their office in person again, and I said, this is my understanding of the hearing that's coming up. This is what I prepared. Do I need an attorney? Do I need any other information handy? And I had asked before to make sure it was in person, so that, you know, in person is a whole different dynamic. And they said, yes, they put that down there. Well, now in person meant that I could come in person and sit in one of their closets, but that didn't mean that anybody else would be there. So that defeated that. And they noticed that I had another case. And I said, I don't know. There's different numbers I have. There's been a lot of confusion. I keep coming down here every month to just kind of touch base, and I don't know what's going on. And so they said, well, this other number means you have a duplicate case. And I said, no, they're not duplicate. They're different items. And we can merge them together. And so the goal would be to meet with them this Friday and talk about the whole thing together. But that's not what happened. Late in the night on Thursday, before the Friday conversation, I got a random phone call. No real information, a block number saying that my hearing had been canceled the next day. Not even email follow-up. So I didn't know if that was real or not. So the next morning I got up early and I drove down to the office myself. And at this point there was no line. There was one person in the lobby. It happened to be a security guard. And there was a glass. People were behind the glass. So you couldn't even see anybody at that point, but apparently they were back there in the cubicles. And so I went up and rang the doorbell, and somebody came out, and I explained why I was there. And they looked it up and they said, yes, it has been canceled. Why are you here? No real information or anything. And I said, no, this is my opportunity to work with my employer to resolve, so that hopefully I can get my job back. And if not, have a fair resolution. Why was this canceled? And they wouldn't help. Well, meanwhile, it was coming up on the time where the meeting was supposed to start. So I told them I was going to step aside and at least call into the number I had. So I called into the number, and surprisingly, somebody answered the phone, and it happened to be the person that I had talked to several days ago. He was very kind and very direct, and told me to get a pen and paper and jot down some ways that I could ask for a reassignment to somebody who would be more competent in the role and more professional. And he told me the exact language to use and who to address that to. Meanwhile, there was a supervisor that came out, not out, she was still behind the glass, and was banging on the glass trying to get my attention. She could clearly see that I was on a phone call, and I was the only one there except for the security officer. So there was no immediate need, but she was banging there trying to get my attention. So I turned around and I said, I don't know who that is. And the gentleman said, well, let's wrap up. I said, I still have a couple more questions. And so he wrapped up, he gave me this information. I wrote it down. I took the paper back and I went back and I asked again for the supervisor. And they said, oh, that was the woman who came out here. And because you didn't meet with her, she's not going to meet with you. What kind of kindergarten behavior is that? So I said I would sit down and wait until she was available. When she came out there, I read exactly what he had told me to say. In addition to that, under the California Open Records Act, I wanted to know who okay, there you go, who had canceled and interfered with the whole purpose of the organization to make an agreement, an appointment between the employee and the employer and have potential resolve. And I also wanted, there were some other items as well, because the interference was consistent. And in the back of my head, I didn't have it at this time, but I asked, the line out the door has always been people that don't speak English, and there's nobody here, meaning that the cases must have been resolved. Why am I still here? And she told me she was refusing to take my California Open Records Act request. I told her she didn't have an opportunity to refuse that. That's the law. So then she disappeared again, and then finally came back. I don't know what she did. And I said, okay, well, I'd like to, what you do is you just stamp this and then you give me a copy so I have proof that it was received, and then I leave. And so she took it from me and said she was going to go look it up. So I looked at, I had it already pulled up on my phone. So I held up my phone and I said, if you need a reference, this might be helpful. So I held it up close to the glass, and they walked away. So I put my phone back. Well, she came back and apparently she saw that she needed to take it. So she then told me as she was taking it and stamping and giving it back that she made a threat that I had been banging on the glass, and something about that not being I can't remember the exact words that she said, which was my clue of crazy town and to end that conversation and to remove myself. So I said, please add to that Open Records Act request a request for the lobby cameras. And then I took a picture of the security, which a timestamp showing that he's still sitting in the corner with his feet up, watching some kind of video on his cell phone that's plugged into the wall. Clearly there's been no disturbance because he's still sitting there, right? So I asked for the video. I then drove immediately over to the senator's office, and I said, this is what I have. This is very odd. I would like you to formally request the Open Records Act request, which they call a PRA. And I want you to ask for the lobby video footage, because I think there's going to be something else that's going to happen here. And then I told him about the comment and what happened and why I immediately wanted to remove myself once that happened, based on the attitude of the supposed supervisor, which I found out later she's not a supervisor. But so they requested it. And once again, we are now, that was November 7th, and we're now mid-January, and they still have not received the response. But what they did receive after multiple requests was a note from the regional manager who said that the reason that my cases haven't been heard was, I can't remember right now, but it's invalidated by the next email anyways, but they gave some reasons, but then did state that because I had duplicate filings, they merged them. Well, merge them and still let me have a hearing. I never got the first one. And so they said that I refused to participate in the communication. And so I have to wait 18 months for the whatever hearing. But that number 18 months never changes. So in March, they told me it would be 18 months from that date. In September, it would be 18 months from that date. Tomorrow, it will be 18 months from that date. So what is the 18 months? It's not pegged to anything. And I had already told the senator's office that it's very odd that everywhere I went, they would only have grants for migrants. And yet Department of Labor was also prioritizing migrants. In fact, people who, although California under sanctuary status said that anybody could work here, did not necessarily have a right to be in this country, more or less work in this country. We're being prioritized over me with my own tax dollars paying for it. I talked about the child care opportunity in the last video, where, as we've seen in Minneapolis, a number of the child care facilities don't have any children. And they're raking in millions of dollars a year of taxpayer funded just based on fraud. But when you actually need child care, there's no free place for you to bring your child. So who gets the free child care and who's taking all the money? But the opportunity cost in California, that is, they go starting with the letter A, those that do have children and have a normal and safe child care facility are being harassed by California and being told that they're going to have to shut down. Well, do you want to trust your child with somebody that's going to be safe and honest? That's the only direction that child care is going, is those that are committing fraud. So here with the Department of Labor, I was also seeing a pattern. And then they were actually interfering with the ability to reach out to the employer. It didn't make a sense to me, but it was what we were seeing. Okay. They just take turns. Let me put it here. Okay, if you're going to lay down. So as I kept pushing and pushing and pushing, finally, we got an email through the senator's office from a different department. And the other department told the senator that they are prioritizing Department of Labor cases based on a variety of factors. Time is a consideration, meaning it's time stamped, but that's just an indicator of one of the categories. The main category was immigration status. And because I did not qualify for that category, mine was deprioritized, which proved what I had been saying for years with that office. The Office of the Department of Labor, which is supposed to enforce discrimination acts and be fair for all employees, was in fact and continues to discriminate against me. So they've not only interfered with the employer and employee conversations, they've put my case routinely on the back burner. But here's the kicker. They also told the senator's office that because of my behavior of banging on the glass, there we go, they were going to consider to close my case if my behavior didn't improve. Really? My behavior was staying on top of this, going to their office to check in monthly, and being persistent in saying, I would really like to return this so I can go back to work. And for that, that's their response. There's serious corruption within the Department of Labor. So as I mentioned, I drove up to another jurisdiction outside of my area and asked them for help. The gentleman that was facing the glass window, and there was nobody in the lobby there and no security upstairs. There was one downstairs who actually walked me upstairs because he was chatty and wanted to make sure that I was taken care of, and very kind. And somebody else in that building also, when I went to the wrong room, said he would walk with me 2 floors to get to the right room because they had moved and the boards were wrong, meaning they were a very kind group of people. So I walk into the Department of Labor that's in a different jurisdiction with different management, and I just give them a snippet of what I need. Basically, I'm requesting the right to change jurisdictions just so I can be treated fairly. I can still wait my turn, but I want to be treated fairly. And he just kind of mumbled. He was obviously, appeared to be not fully engaged in his job, maybe even some issues of depression. I wouldn't say that, if I gave his name or anything, but there was something else going on there. He was frustrated. And in mid conversation, he left from behind the glass through the door out to the lobby where I was, walked past me and left. He's gone. In fact, it was so noticeable that one of his trainees, a coworker of his, but a trainee, came out and asked me, "Is he coming back?" And I said, "I'm not clear on what just happened here." Well, he came back a few minutes later. Apparently, he had to use the restroom, but the lack of communication was odd. He anyways. So she started researching a little bit more to see if there was another way to solve this. Are you good? Okay, don't cry for me. And he said, there's nothing that's going to happen here. All of the state of California is prioritizing migrants over you. Get over it. And he didn't mean it in any way of a tone that I might use to be rude or anything. You could see from, again, that kind of depressed, maybe not clinically, but I mean, just like I'm giving up kind of thing, that people aren't being taken care of the way they should. So they told me how to send an email to request a move of a jurisdiction, but they couldn't. I said I'd already gone to that mail and it's a fake mailbox. And he says, no, it's on the site. And they wouldn't send a test email. So I sent one right in front of him and it bounced back. And I said, even when I worked for the federal government, I could reach out to the White House and get responses. How is it that you can't get a hold of your supervisors and get responses? He said, we are locked in. We can't reach out. I knew that was a lie, but he wouldn't. And there were apparently, he's falling. I don't know if you can see his head right now, but he's falling asleep backwards. So there was no help there. And you could tell that office was just, the state of California is stealing tax dollars and giving job opportunities to immigrants, protecting those immigrants, and then worse than that, replacing individuals who have earned the right for those positions. But the kicker is, who pays the taxes? Without jobs, this state is really going to suffer. And I say that, I have for years. And where are we today? California is on the verge of bankruptcy. States can't file bankruptcy. But if they could, I'm sure they would do it to get out of all of the retirement obligations. It's just one mass grab over and over and over again. Well, anyways, they proved my point. One is my intuition was right about getting out of there because of the flippant banging the window issue. And good thing that I had evidence and proof and immediately took it seriously to not only remove myself, but to go to the senator for expedited assistance. But also that migrants, once again, were being prioritized above me. Now, when I asked the senator's office, I said, do you have a lot of people like me come in here asking for help? And they say no. The people that do come in need help filling out the forms, meaning they don't speak English. And then their cases seem to get resolved. Well, you know why people like me aren't down there? Because we just give up. Many of my coworkers said that they weren't going to file anywhere because of the corruption. It didn't matter. In fact, they didn't even file for unemployment. When I filed for unemployment, I had to file 3 times with the help of the senator's office because I kept getting blindly denied. Meanwhile, we saw that Barbara Boxer was given unemployment and everybody in the prison systems was able to apply and a high percentage got unemployment. Nothing seemed to make sense except for the fraud and the criminal activity that continues to hurt a select group of the people. And now what I'm experiencing, watching what's going on in many. Remember the lady that was delivering DoorDash last week? Let's see if I can grab this here. It's okay. Um, the lady that was delivering DoorDash last week, and she was, um, this was went viral. I don't know what it was streaming on. The woman who was streaming it said she had 11,000 viewers on, and I can't remember the platform. But she ordered DoorDash, and when the person brought the food up, apparently they tried to grab her, and the DoorDasher ran inside the woman's home. Now, there's a number of issues here. First of all, what kind of husband does this woman have, the one who owns the house? Every time she would say something like, we own this home and ICE doesn't have a right on our property, her husband would work like a parrot. Yeah, we own this home and you don't have a right to be here. He's certainly a follower, not a leader. So you could tell who run the pants in that family. But if I order food and somebody pushes in past me to get in my house, I'm going to have a problem with that. Especially the lady is holding a child. She kept saying her baby. She said she had two and they were about toddler age, I guess. I don't know. But she was holding a small child. If a person pushes in past me while I'm holding a small child, that problem is going to escalate even faster. Now, you don't know who's coming in there, but you've got somebody who is running from the police. There's a problem with that. So the woman who is trying to get the ICE off her property calls the police for help. He's going to start snoring. And while she calls the police, she finds out that she's harboring a criminal, and that's a crime. So she decides to open the door and let the DoorDash lady go back outside. Meanwhile, the DoorDash lady is crying. Well, eventually, the ICE officers end up leaving. They get in their cars and leave. What do you think they actually left? No, they didn't leave. I mean, they could have gone down the corner and grabbed her later or whatever. But they had an arrest warrant for her. They didn't have one for inside that property, so they couldn't execute that. But this was a targeted arrest. They were going after her. She had now shown the ID to them to verify that it was her. To her home and pick her up. It's not that hard. But why, when you order DoorDash or any of these food, do you get some stranger knowing your name and your address that let me put it down here. Has a right to all that information to come up to your home? Why are these companies allowing that? Well, because of this friction that we're seeing in Minneapolis, anybody with lighter skin or blonde hair is a target right now. And when I walk around, whether it's the street or a grocery store or at the gym, the comments to me and the rudeness are off the charts. People are not checking themselves and understanding that racism goes both ways. And so for the Department of Labor to not hear my case and to not help me because they're helping other people, not because of the priority or the timeline, but some arbitrary marker that they've come up with, which is against the law according to the federal law. And yet they require me to pay taxes to pay for this. There's a problem with that. So what have we talked about today? We've talked about a number of issues. We started out with Candace Owens and the developing storyline that is coming out of that, as she knows where she's going. She may not have all the evidence gathered yet, but as she develops her story, more and more individuals are showing up with receipts and validating the truth. Individuals are taking a bounty to attack her when she's more on the nose of what's going on. I don't know. It just doesn't. It's very sad, the manipulation that we have. And yes, private eyes are always watching us. We know that the government is. But it's those that we don't even know that are watching us that can often be more dangerous. So then I moved into the home theft of the 82-year-old woman. How this can happen, I don't know. It's just disgusting. You work your whole life for something and have it taken away. Get kicked to the curb, just like the thumbnail. Doesn't make sense. And then I went into the Department of Labor corruption. This country is not at a breaking point yet, but it sure needs to be. It needs to be cleaned up. We need to be able to move forward. In order for capitalism to work, for the economy to grow, and for us to come back to the dream of a home and a white picket fence and a family, travel, excitement, free time, a lot of changes need to happen. So to all of you who tuned in today and heard the story, I really appreciate it. I'm going to be monitoring the comments on these videos to see if there's any insights or any other ways that I can help this woman. If there's anything else I can do to keep moving this forward with the goal of getting her home back. Blessings to all of you. Have a great Sunday afternoon.